Baik Bapak Ibu hadir sekalian, selanjutnya kita akan masuk pada panel session yang ketiga dengan topik dan tema adalah Think Different yang akan dibawakan oleh Miss Sally and Pitt. Izinkan saya menyampaikan sedikit biografi dari beliau. Beliau dipercaya menjadi Ketua Komite Audit dan Risiko di Tertiary Education Qualification and Standard Authority, dan hingga tahun 2022 beliau merupakan anggota Komite Penasehat dari Lifeblood Palang Merah serta Komite Etik Australian Bone Marrow Donor Registry, dan beliau juga merupakan mantan direktur dari IIA Australia, Ketua Komite Global untuk Tanggung Jawab Profesional dan Etika IIA, serta telah menjadi anggota Komite Global IIA sejak 2008. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Miss Sally and Pitt.
Terima kasih again for having me. Thank you so much. So this session is a little bit different. Really, this is about my theme for the year when I was Global Chair. So, and the theme was Think Different. And the reason, I chose this, there were lots of reasons. Because when I was growing up, I didn't plan to be an internal auditor. In fact, I didn't even know what internal auditing was. And then I went to university and I didn't study internal auditing. I studied science and my master's was in public policy, nothing about internal audit. Then I started work, and I started work in government. And I really, saw my pathway probably to one day end up leading a government agency. But life has its ways of twisting and turning, and that wasn't the path that I eventually took. And fast forward 20 years, and I've had an internal audit consulting business for over 20 years now. But when I talk to my family and friends about what I do, they still always ask me questions about financial statements, finances, accounting type questions. But I'm not an accountant. I don't have any background in financial statements. I don't do financial audit. Yet after 20 years, my family and friends still really don't know what I do. They don't know what internal auditing is. And that's pretty terrible. But that's precisely why I chose this theme. Because it's really important that we help people to think different about what internal audit is. But I also believe that we can't really expect other people to think different about internal audit if we don't think different ourselves. The inspiration for my theme really came from Steve Jobs and the Apple campaign over 20 years ago. And in that campaign, there was this amazing TV ad. Some of you might have seen it at the time. And part of the ad said, "Here's to the crazy ones, the misfits, the rebels, the troublemakers, the round pegs in a square hole, the ones who see things different." And those words really resonated with me, because I think a lot of times when people think about internal auditors, they often think about accountants. They may sometimes think about those boring people who sit in the rooms at the back of their organisation and who are always just telling people what's wrong. Negative people, maybe people who don't necessarily have the best interests of their organisation at heart. They just always want to find fault with their organisation. And I just think those views are so wrong. And they just don't reflect what we do and what we need to do. Because I've already spoken this morning, and we've heard other people talk about the way the world is changing. Organisations are changing so much. I spoke about those changes in the top 10 risks that the World Economic Forum predicts over the next 10 years. And those risks are looking really different than what they looked 10 years ago. I could have put up a similar chart that had the risks because they've done this for years and years. And 10 years ago, they were very financially focused, the risks. So the world's changing. Our organisations are changing. So we as internal auditors need to change with that. We need to be making sure that we're providing assurance over those areas that really matter for our organisations. And it's not just even the risks that our organisations are facing, it's the strategies as well that our organisations are trying to achieve. Are we helping them to become and to be what they need to be? These things are so important for us to think about as internal auditors. So as internal auditors, we ourselves need to think different. It's terrible that my family and friends still don't know what I do after 20 years. But what have I done to help them better understand what I do? We need to think different about who we are as internal auditors, as a profession, what we do as a profession, and how we do it. That's up to us. Having an historic view of what's happened in the past may have been okay once upon a time. Because internal audit has evolved as a profession, and it came from a very compliance focus. That's what internal audit was. But we know that that's not what internal audit is now, and it can't be what internal audit is in 10 years' time. So we need to think different about what we need to do to make sure that we're adding and creating the value that we need to for our organisations to succeed. We need to think about the assurance that we're giving. So if we're still focused on traditional compliance areas, that's important to some extent, but it shouldn't be everything that we do. We shouldn't just be looking historically at what's happened in the past. We need to be looking to the future. We need to be looking at the areas that we're providing assurance over. Are we providing that assurance over HR and talent? Are we providing assurance over cyber? We've heard a lot about that. Are we providing assurance over ESG and sustainability? And what about things like culture? I mean, it's such an important bedrock of our organisations. Without the right culture, it doesn't matter what our policies and processes are if there isn't a culture that supports that. Are we as internal auditors providing assurance over culture? So we need to think about that. Think differently about what we're assuring. Make sure that we're focused on the future. Make sure that we're providing insight and foresight. And also make sure that we're helping our organisations achieve success. We also need to think different about who we are as internal auditors. I would guess that there would be a fair proportion of people with accounting and finance backgrounds in this room. And don't get me wrong, they're important backgrounds. We need people with those skills in our team. But if we're providing assurance over ESG, over cyber, over talent, over culture, we need people with a broader set of skills. If we're an engineering company, a resource company, we probably need people with some engineering skills. In healthcare, we're benefiting from people with health backgrounds. We need to really think about those skills when we look to make up our internal audit teams. Because we need to understand our business well. And to understand our business well, we need to know what that business is. But it doesn't stop there. We also need diversity of thought and diversity of experience. Why? Why is that important? Because diversity breeds resilience. Having diverse audit teams allows us to think different. It gives us people from different backgrounds with different lived experiences who, quite frankly, are going to approach problems differently. There is a lot of research that says diverse teams come up with better solutions. We want that diversity in our teams, and that can be hard. It can be hard when we recruit, because sometimes it's easier to recruit people that are the same as you are. But it's really important that we don't just have a team of the same sort of people. The broader the backgrounds and the broader the lived experience, from age, from demographic, from culture, from ethnicity, you name it, that will allow us to better reflect our organisations, and it will allow us to add more value. We also need to think, though, about the ways we work as internal auditors. Because those traditional ways that we've worked have served us really well in the past. We've developed some really sound approaches. We've used tools and techniques for many years that have been useful. But now we need to embrace some of these changing technologies. If we know that our organisations are changing, are being disrupted, we need to also embrace those types of things in the way we do our work. We need to think about things like data analytics, big data, how we're using those to see trends, to predict what's going to happen. But we also need to think about things like AI. And I made the comment this morning that in this region, we know that less internal auditors are thinking about the way they can use and embrace AI than in other regions. And it's okay to be a little fearful of using AI because there's a lot of risks associated with it. And I'm not for 1 minute suggesting that you'd go out and put your organisation's data into ChatGPT and get them to come up with the answers for your audit. But there are things that you can do safely. And for organisations who have their own closed AI systems, even the better. So we need to think about that as we go forward, how we can do things differently. But it's not just data and AI. We also need to think about approaches like behavioural auditing techniques. I would be encouraging you that if you had the opportunity to tap into behavioural scientists as part of your teams, to allow them to help you build programs that think about things like culture, unintended biases, things like that. They will help you come up with better audit answers as well. So it's not just the traditional ways of working. We need to think about some of these different ways to really create value. We also need to think as internal auditors about the relationships that we have with our business. Internal audit has this amazing, privileged position of being able to see over an organisation. So in some ways, we can almost think of ourselves like the conductor of an organisation. We have this opportunity to be able to bring together different parts of the organisation to see those pockets of excellence and to share them with the rest of the organisation. We can help build that collaboration across the organisation. We can also engage with other parts of our organisations to better provide good coordinated assurance. As internal auditors, most of us aren't in the privileged position of having hundreds of auditors in our team. So often we're limited in our ability to really provide full coverage of assurance across our organisations. So it's important that we work with those other parts to look at where some of those other assurance, where that other assurance is being provided from. And to the extent that we can rely on that assurance, whether it's first line, whether it's second line, whether it's external, we should be relying on that assurance. Because doing so helps the organisation. It gives greater comfort when we can extend our reach and cover more areas. One of the things that we perhaps also need to think to do as internal auditors is to develop relationships for insight. And what do I mean by this? Well, we're being asked as internal auditors to do more. And as I've said, and other people have talked about, things are becoming more complex. Organisations are changing. The rate at which that change is happening and the disruption is happening is accelerating. So it's very hard for us as internal auditors to have all the answers and to be able to stay ahead of all of those changes. Now, we should be continuously learning. And often I'm asked the question, what's the one attribute you think that an internal auditor should have? And I always say it's a thirst to learn. If you're not curious, you perhaps shouldn't be an internal auditor. So I think we ourselves always need to develop new skills and, to better understand our organisations and the risks we're facing. But in reality, we're not going to be able to do everything ourselves. And I spoke earlier today about the issues in terms of attracting some of the skills that we need into internal audit. So we need to look at other ways that we can get that inside as well. And we might need to partner with other parts of the business. We might need to bring in guest auditors into our audit team. At times, we might have to bring in co-source providers to give us some of that expertise we need. And we shouldn't be worried about that. Sometimes when I do external assessments of audit functions, some CAEs say to me, we need to have all of these skills ourselves and, we don't want the audit committee saying that we're not skilled in certain areas. To me, acknowledging that you need to get extra assistance is a really positive thing. That shouldn't be a negative thing. So we should look at ways that we can do that. All of that sounds fine. And I'm a big advocate that internal auditors should be an active part of an organisation. They shouldn't sit outside of the organisation. They should be embedded within it. And we've talked about, Maury talked earlier about advice and providing advisory services. And it's one of the things I think with the new global internal audit standards that we're certainly hearing people say, how do we provide this advice? How does that impact our independence? And personally, I think people have hidden behind independence for too long. We can't do that. That will impact our independence. Oh no, we can't sit, at that committee. That will impact our independence. Independence is such a critical part of who we are as internal auditors. So there is no way that we want to compromise that. But being part of the organisation, providing advice, trying to add value to our organisation is not impacting our independence. Sure, we need to make sure at all times we don't lose or compromise our independence, but we need to find the right balance. Not hiding behind it, but making sure that we're partnering well. All of that, developing these different relationships, really helps us as internal auditors move from being those back office, back room people to being front and centre, to being an active part of our organisation. We can have relationships with people in our organisation and not be compromising our role. The more we know about our organisation, the greater the value that we can offer. So we need to think different about what those relationships are and how we can build them and strengthen them while still maintaining our independent role. One of the things that I'm absolutely proud of at the IIA, at the Institute of Internal Auditors. And one of the things that I heard someone say earlier, one of our superpowers as internal auditors. Well, I think our absolute superpower as an IIA is our federation model. It's the fact that we are an organisation, a professional association, that's made up of 117 national institutes around the world. That federation model allows us to think different. It allows us to identify the pockets of excellence that exist all over the world and to leverage those pockets of excellence for our profession as a whole. I'm really committed on the global board and while I was global chair to make sure as an association we were thinking different constantly. Not to just accept the status quo of what we've done in the past, a lot of which has been excellent, but to continually challenge whether it's right for the way that we're heading. And some of those amazing ways that we have thought different are things like reimagining our standards, ensuring that they are fit for purpose for our role over the next 10 or 20 years. It's about rethinking how we spread the message about who we are as internal auditors and who we are as a professional association. And it's also in doing things like the Vision 2035 project, which was absolutely designed to say, where do we think that we will be in 10 years' time as a profession? What will our profession look like? What's going to be good about it and what's going to be bad about it? And what do we want it to look like? And once we can answer those questions, it then helps us to build a path towards where we want to be in 10 years' time. So, in the words of Steve Jobs, think different. I would challenge all of you out there to maybe be the crazy ones, to think a little bit different about how you do your work. I sometimes have young internal auditors say to me, you know, it sounds great, but I'm just the youngest, the least experienced internal auditor in my team. You know, how can I make a difference? And I say, there has to be one way you work that you could see a little improvement. We're not talking about changing the world of internal audit. We're talking about changing processes one step at a time that lead us to doing a better job. So be crazy. Be a rebel. Challenge what you're doing. Why do we do our audits this way? Can we do them in a better way? And maybe be misfits. You don't have to fill a stereotype of what the internal auditor looks like. I don't know what the stereotype is. You know, what does an internal auditor look like? Why can't we look completely different? Why can't there be 1,000 different looks of what the internal auditor looks like? Maybe it's someone with deep legal experience. Maybe it's a young person who's come out of a cybersecurity area. Who knows what an internal auditor looks like? But we need to embrace those differences to build great teams. So don't actually feel like you need to conform to some sort of stereotype. Be prepared to challenge the status quo because the world is changing so much and so quickly that we need a profession that's changing along with it. Terima kasih again. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Miss Sally and Pitt. Thank you. You may be seated.